From the pyramids of Giza to Stonehenge to Machu Picchu, ancient civilizations built some truly impressive megastructures. So how exactly did they do it? Some pretty common assumptions are that they had help from aliens, or that they used advanced technology that has since been lost. But recent research suggests that neither of these things were necessary. Instead, their builders relied on clever engineering tricks, brute force, and a little bit of cheating. Well, by today's standards, anyway. The Inca, Egyptians, and other ancient cultures didn't have any fancy tools like cement mixers, steel girders, or cranes. But what they lacked in technology, they made up for with sheer manpower and creativity. For example, they developed innovative workarounds to move huge blocks of stone. Archaeologists believe the Egyptians used ramps to move the massive stones that make up the pyramids. Ramps might sound simple, but they were an incredible feat of engineering for the time period, because they would have had to be built using huge amounts of labor and resources. The workers would have needed to coordinate with each other so that the ramp didn't collapse before the stones reached the top of the pyramid. This required careful planning and communication, which is even more impressive when you consider that the Egyptians didn't have any written language to help them communicate complex ideas. They developed sophisticated systems of ramps, levers, and rollers to move huge stones into place without any of the equipment we use today. In fact, modern-day engineers have attempted to recreate these methods and have found them to be surprisingly effective. One team of engineers successfully moved a 70-ton stone block using nothing but levers and manpower. It took 80 people and 24 hours to complete the task, but they did it without any of the equipment we take for granted today. It wasn't just the Egyptians who used ramps to move large objects. The builders of Stonehenge also used ramps to move the massive stones that make up this prehistoric monument. However, unlike the Egyptians, the builders of Stonehenge did have one very important tool at their disposal: the wheel. The wheel was invented around 3500 BC in Mesopotamia and quickly spread throughout Europe. By the time Stonehenge was being built around 3000 BC, the wheel was a common invention, and the builders could use wheeled vehicles to help move the stones. Still, it is hard to imagine how they managed to move such large stones without some sort of mechanical device to help them. But archaeologists believe that the builders of Stonehenge used a combination of ramps, levers, and rollers to move the stones into place. These tools may seem primitive, but they were incredibly effective. And archaeologists have even managed to reconstruct some of these tools to see how they worked. One researcher was even able to move a large sarsenstone block using only a wooden lever. He used a 15-meter-long lever to lift and roll the stone, which weighed approximately 4 tons. It took him several hours to complete the task, but he did it without any modern equipment. Of course, moving the stones was only half the battle. The builders of these monuments also had to figure out how to lift the stones into place. For example, the Inca built Machu Picchu, high up in the Andes Mountains. The site consists of hundreds of buildings, terraces, and other structures made from huge blocks of granite. The largest of these blocks weighs over 60 tons. The Inca didn't have any wheeled vehicles or beasts of burden like oxen or horses to help them move the stones. So they likely used a system of ropes and pulleys to lift the stones into place. This would have required a lot of manpower and coordination, but it's not beyond the capabilities of the Inca, who were known for their skill as engineers and architects. The ancient builders also took advantage of the natural world to help them build. For example, the builders of Stonehenge used the natural phenomenon of stone hinges to help them align the stones. Archaeologists have found that the stones at Stonehenge are aligned with the This suggests that the builders had a sophisticated understanding of astronomy and mathematics. But they weren't the only ones who used the stars to help them build. The Egyptians also used astronomical alignments to help them build the pyramids. The 3 pyramids at Giza are aligned with the constellation of Orion. This suggests that the Egyptians had a deep knowledge of the night sky and used it to help them plan their construction projects. But if the ancient builders didn't use advanced technology or alien help, how did they get the idea for these monumental constructions in the first place? How did knowledge of engineering and architecture get passed down through generations? The answer, according to researchers, is that it was often passed down orally, in cultures without a written language. Knowledge was often passed down from one generation to the next through stories, songs, and other forms of oral tradition. This isn't to say that there was no written language. There was some writing in most societies, but it was often used for record keeping or for religious purposes rather than for everyday communication. Most people were illiterate, and knowledge was passed down orally. It's hard to imagine how complex concepts like engineering and architecture could be communicated this way, but it was done all the time. The Inca, for example, didn't have any written language at all. Yet they managed to build some of the most impressive structures in the ancient world. They passed down their knowledge through a system of knotted ropes called keep. The Inca kept detailed records of everything from population numbers to the amount of goods stored in their warehouses. They also used quipu to keep track of astronomical data, which they used to help them plan their agricultural cycle. The Inca weren't the only ones who used knotted ropes for communication. The ancient Egyptians also used a system of knotted ropes to help them keep track of time. They would make knots at regular intervals along a rope, and then they would slide the knots along the rope to keep track of time. This is pretty similar to how we keep time today with clocks and watches. Of course, this method of keeping time was not very precise, but it was still useful for the Egyptians who didn't have any other way to keep track of time. Most of the time, the ancient builders didn't have to invent new technologies. They simply adapted existing technologies for new purposes. For example, the Egyptians adapted the sail to help them transport goods down the Nile River. This allowed them to move large blocks of stone to the construction sites where they were needed. They also used boats to help them quarry the stone. The Egyptians quarried the limestone for the pyramids, using a simple but effective technique. They would dig a series of holes in the rock face, then fill the holes with water and freeze it. As the water expanded, it would crack the rock, allowing the Egyptians to pry the stone away from the cliff face. This technique is similar to how we split rocks today, using a combination of water and ice. Of course, the ancient builders didn't have any of the advanced tools we use today, but they were still able to accomplish some truly impressive feats of engineering. Modern-day experiments have shown that many of these structures could have been built using nothing but manpower and basic tools. Groups of volunteers have attempted to recreate some of the ancient structures, and they've been successful in doing so. In one experiment, a group of volunteers tried to build a replica of the Great Pyramid of Giza. They used the same tools and techniques the Egyptians would have used, and they were able to build a small-scale replica of the pyramid. It took them several weeks to complete the project, but they did it without any modern equipment. These mega-structures are a testament to the ingenuity of the ancient builders. They show that humans have always been capable of great things, and that we don't need advanced technology or alien help to accomplish our goals. Of course, these structures are not the only things the ancient builders accomplished. They also built temples, palaces, and other structures that are just as impressive. But the megastructures are especially impressive because of their sheer size and scope. They showed that the ancient builders were capable of taking on huge projects and seeing them through to completion. What's your favorite ancient structure and why? Let us know in the comments below. And thank you for watching!